Hello everyone, welcome you all to the tutorial on XML manipulation. In today's video tutorial, we are going to talk about XML data standard library and how we can use that to convert and give an XML value into Ballerina records. So it's a very common use case in integration world where we would expose an legacy XML service with a different representation. So in this tutorial we are going to expose a dummy XML service using a JSON service. So we will consume the XML service and convert that XML payload into Ballerina records, and then convert that Ballerina records into JSON and return response from that JSON service. So let me guys show you the dummy service that I have written. So this is a simple service written in Ballerina and it's running on port 9090, and it has a hard-coded value inside this resource function. So when I send a request to this service, it will give me that hard-coded value as XML. So this is the response I get when I invoke that service. So we have the orders as the outermost element in this XML payload, and inside the orders we have multiple order elements, and it has an attribute called ID, and inside that we have the customer element and the items element. And inside the customer element we have two elements, name and email. Inside the items we have multiple item elements, and each of those item elements will have three more elements, name, quantity and price, and it will also have this ID attribute. And we also have the total element as the child element of the order element, and it has the attribute called currency. So we are going to map this XML into a Ballerina record. To represent this XML as a Ballerina record, we have to have the same we have to have a record with the same name as this name, that means orders, and the attributes and the child elements have to be represented using the record fields. So let's first create a new Ballerina project using bal new command. So we can, so let me type it here. So in the terminal, once you install Ballerina, type bal and space new and the project name that you want to put for your new package. So I'm going to put order details, and I have already created this project and I have copied the necessary records into this main bal file. And let me show you guys how I'm going to map these records into this XML. So now I have created this record called orders, and it will be mapped to this XML element orders, and it has XMLNS as an attribute. So I will represent that using a field called XMLNS. So I have used this quotation mark here because XML is a reserved word in Ballerina. And we also have multiple orders inside the orders element. So I will use an array of order records to represent them. So order will also have an attribute called ID, and inside the orders we have a customer element and the items element. So to represent them, I have created two different records, customer and items here. And the customer will have two fields, name and email, and the items will have an array of item record. And you can see that I have not created any record to represent the total, and I have not used it inside this because I'm going to ignore that one and I'm going to process part of it. But this is an open record, it's not like closed record like this. It's an open record. So this total will be mapped to an rest field inside this record. So now we have created the necessary records, and I hope you understood how I map these into this record. Now we need a way to tell the compiler that this XMLNS is not a child element inside these orders, but it's an attribute. So to communicate that information to the compiler, we have to use the XML data standard library and use a special annotation called attribute. So I'm going to use that. First I need to import the XML data. So when you type XML data, so when we start with at to use annotations, and when you type XML data, the Ballerina XML data library will pop up, and if you select that, that will be automatically imported. And now I use colon and use the attribute. Now this will say the compiler that this is going to be an attribute in the XML payload under the orders element. So this value will be mapped to this. So the same has to be used for the ID of the order and also the ID of the item, because they are also attributes. See, they are also attributes. Now we have done the mapping between the XML payload and the records. Now we need to do the real conversion from the XML to records. So let me write the service first. Okay, and I'm going to run this service on port 8000, and I'm gonna need a HTTP client to invoke the dummy XML service, and I'm going to call this order service, order client, and I'm going to initialize that client inside the init function. So yeah, I initialized it. Now I am going to write the resource function that we are going to expose to the outside world. So in this new resource function, we are going to consume the backend XML service and convert that to record, and then that record will be converted back to JSON. So we are going to use the get method as the HTTP get method, and I am going to use the same orders endpoint, and I am going to return a JSON. And if the passing that means the XML is not passed properly to records, it can throw an error. So I'm going to return an error also, but this is not a best practice. If you are going to handle errors from within JSON resource function, you have to have the proper error messages and the HTTP error codes and return the proper responses. But since we are strictly focusing on XML manipulation part, I'm simply going to return the error here. And you just don't need to return the JSON from this resource function. You can simply return the orders also, because this is a subtype of JSON, because the Ballerina will automatically convert the records into JSON if you return it from resource function. So you don't need to worry about that transformation. Now I'm going to call the my HTTP client and get the XML payload from the backend service. And in this way you can get the XML payload from the backend service by calling this orders endpoint. And there's a more easy way to do this. So you can get rid of this get and call the orders endpoint like this. So this is one way to call this orders endpoint, and the Ballerina will understand that it's going to call this orders endpoint in this port, and it is an get call, so it knows, it understands that. Now we have received the XML. Now we need to convert that into Ballerina records. So this is how we are going to do that. We want to convert that to orders record, this one, and I'm going to use XML data from XML function to convert. So the first argument has to be the XML that we want to convert, and the second argument is the target type which this XML to be converted to. So it is orders, and this is now give me an error because this might fail if the mapping is not done properly. So I need to check here to throw the error, but as a best practice, if you are going to handle that error, you need to throw an internal server error saying that there is a serialization issue. So since we are strictly focusing on XML manipulation, I am simply going to ignore that error. Now there's a special thing about this from XML. You don't need orders here. You can actually remove that, because this from XML function will infer the target type from the left hand side of this equation. So it knows that this XML need to be converted to orders type, so you can use that without the second argument. Now we have converted this XML into Ballerina records. Now let's access the orders array inside this orders record, that means this one. So, and let's return it inline like this. So order is a reserved word in Ballerina, so we have to escape that using single quotation mark. Now we have written our service and we need to see if it's working. Let me guys show you the graphical representation of this service, and it's a sequence diagram. You can see this is how it looks in the diagram, and let's run the service and invoke. Okay, now the service is being compiled. Okay, now the service is running. Let me send a request to 8000 orders endpoint. As you can see that the content has been converted to an JSON, and we are receiving it as an JSON array. So what we did here was send a request to the backend XML dummy service and get that, and using the XML data standard library and the function from it, from XML, convert that to a Ballerina records and get the array and return it from this resource function. So the Ballerina will convert this array into JSON automatically. We don't need to handle that. So we have achieved what we want to achieve in this tutorial, and I hope you learned how you can use XML data standard library to convert an XML into Ballerina records. So I'm hoping to see you guys in the next video tutorial.